Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on how customer data maturity powers the modern enterprise, a new series of webinars from Tealium that will be running throughout the summer based on new Forrester research on customer data maturity. I'm Jake Spencer, a product marketing manager at Tealium, and I'll be your moderator. So let's get you guys introduced to today's speaker. Today's speaker is Matt Parisi, a senior manager of product marketing at Tealium. He has over 10 years of strategic marketing experience across both traditional and digital marketing channels. His experience spans working with both consultancies and client-side companies. So with that, I'll let you take it away, Matt.
Thanks, Jake. Let's dive right into the agenda here. So to cover the report here in this first webinar, we'll basically first be going over the principal conclusions that we found during the survey with Forrester. Secondly, we'll kind of go through how we came to get the data and pull those insights out of the data. Thirdly, we'll go through that data and dive deep into specifically what data points led to what conclusions. And then last, we'll go through some recommendations for what these findings mean for your own customer data strategies and how you might be able to take some of the insights and apply them to your own businesses. So first off, let's go into the principal conclusions. We had 3 principal conclusions from the report. The number 1 conclusion is that there are 6 key pillars for customer data management maturity. So it's not all just about one aspect of technology or organizational structure or having strong processes. It's a combination of all of these factors. In order for companies to advance their customer data analytics capabilities, you have to master a series of independent categories, with the first one being strategy. So in the strategy or culture dimension of maturity, there are 2 aspects. Applying the strategy, so what's the ways in which the strategy is built into the program, and then organizational commitment. So this is more about the organization's culture and how highly it values data and connecting the insights from data to action. Secondly, we have the organizational structure dimension of maturity. And this comes down to the structure of the teams that are using customer data within an organization. There are 2 aspects to these scores. Number 1, the skills found on the team or in the organization that make up that customer data team. And then secondly, the structure of that team. So is it a cohesive team that's cross-department? Is it a team that meets more ad hoc? Those types of considerations come into play in this dimension. The third dimension of maturity is the data management dimension. So basically there are 3 aspects to this score. The breadth and depth of data sources being the first one. So what kinds of systems are integrated into the customer data strategy program? Is it only marketing, or is there marketing plus sales plus customer service? Secondly, how data is prepared for use. So is data prepared for use? Maybe at the low maturity end, and then at the high maturity end, having a dedicated team to preparing data with established processes. And then the third aspect is the sophistication of the data management across the tech stack. So is data integrated in a seamless process across all of these teams, or is it more ad hoc in the data management practices? The fourth dimension of maturity is analytics and measurement capabilities. There are, again, 2 aspects to this score. The first aspect being the methodology for using the data for analysis, and then secondly, what statistics are produced. So, whether the statistics are more basic in nature or whether they're, utilizing machine learning or predictive capabilities. The 5th dimension of maturity is the processes that are in place. This one has 4 aspects to it. The first aspect being how insights flow across the organization, whether it's ad hoc or whether there are a centralized platform that's accessible across the whole organization. Secondly, how insights are prioritized. So are insights just, prioritized based on gut feeling, or are there well-established ROI metrics? Thirdly, how the output of analysis is executed. So whether the insights get built directly into the data and automate actions across the customer journey, or whether something like a report is generated and then the insights from the report need to be built into the program. Those would be considerations in that aspect. And then fourth and final for our fifth dimension here is how insights are dispersed or communicated. So again, that's kind of similar to what we talked about the last time, whether insights are dispersed via a report or whether that data is accessible from a centralized database in the organization that different team members can access. Finally, the sixth dimension of maturity is technology. These are the tools that are in place to power customer data and analytics. There are two aspects to this score. Number one, how technology is used to integrate data, whether it's an IT team that kind of manually is connecting different systems on an ad hoc basis, whether there's SQL capabilities in place where the data can be queried and accessed, or whether there's a fully integrated and automated platform. Then the second aspect is what kinds of activations are in place. Are the activations taking place through batch processes, or are they in siloed tools, or is there more of a real-time and dynamic system in place? Overall, our study found that only 16% of firms are, one, able to excel across every category or every dimension of maturity, and number two, they're most likely to struggle with strategy and technology. And we'll dive into the specifics of those findings a little bit later. Moving on to our second key finding is that customer data integration is key. So first off, what you can see here is that customer data strategy was found to really well support key business goals. So we surveyed respondents on 16 key business metrics and whether or not their customer data strategy supported those metrics. And what we found is that on average, 84% of respondents said that their customer data strategy well supported the particular business goal. And those 15 key business objectives are listed here. So we'll go through each of these business objectives in particular a little bit later with how well supported they were, and we'll compare basically how high maturity companies did against low maturity companies. Moving on to our third insight was that high maturity organizations do even better. So beyond simply having a customer data strategy, what are the results that companies are getting from their customer data integration initiative, and how do those results differ from low maturity firms to high maturity firms? There was a drastic improvement in reported results for high maturity companies versus low maturity ones. So broadly, all companies reported their customer data strategies supporting their key business objectives well, but what we saw here is that there was a particular lift for those high maturity companies. We'll delve into the full landscape of stats that back up this particular point a little bit later, but we've highlighted three particularly strong lifts that pioneers, basically the high maturity companies, reported from their customer data integration initiatives. So we saw a 35 percentage point lift reporting a better understanding of customers going from low maturity to high maturity, a 37-point lift reporting increased team productivity. So, not only having a better understanding of customers, but actually being able to act on that understanding in a more efficient manner. And then a 43% lift reporting a better lift from customer propensity models. So obviously those customer propensity models may be used for different things, but high maturity companies were able to get an even better lift than low maturity ones for that. So with that, let's delve into basically how did we come to these conclusions, and go through kind of the methodology for the report before diving into the details, the data from the survey. So first off, our survey included 330 respondents who all specifically reported playing a role in customer data strategy, whether that role was simply from having an influence in some manner to being the final decision maker. These respondents came from a variety of roles, including analytics, marketing, customer experience, IT, or line of business product teams. We asked 20 questions to various level of depth. Some had many parts, and we bucketed respondents into 4 groups for the purposes of analysis and for comparing how those groups did across the dimensions of maturity. Respondents came from 3 regions across the globe, just over 50% from the US, about a third from Europe, and 15% from Japan. Respondents worked across a variety of industries. You can see 6 industries here, about evenly represented throughout the report. And also a variety of business sizes. So here we see that about 20% of companies had about 500 million to 1 billion in revenue. Almost 60%, so 59% had 1 billion to 5 billion in revenue, and 21% had over 5 billion in revenue. Lastly, as far as role, like I mentioned, all respondents had some level of responsibility for customer data strategy, but there was quite a few that were the final decision maker. So 24% were the final decision maker, 46% were on the team making the decisions, and then 31% played some role and had some influence in the organization's customer data strategy. Keep an eye out for future webinars where we'll cover individual aspects more around some of these factors that I'm going over here. For now, we're just going over kind of the high level takeaways from the report. So with that, we get to dive into the data. Let's take a look at the specifics behind each one of our conclusions. So first off, the 6 dimensions of maturity. So looking at how organizations stacked up, we can see where companies struggled or excelled in each particular dimension, and then hopefully we'll be able to use that as a clue for where to look in your own strategies to figure out how to make the best improvements. With that, we'll look at the overall maturity scores. So how did firms overall for the entire survey score across on average? With this, we found that taking into account all 6 dimensions of maturity, only 16% of firms fell into the highest level and were identified as pioneers. 35% were leaders, 33% were followers, and 16% were laggards. So in itself, this information isn't overly interesting, but make sure to keep these levels in mind as we go through each individual dimension so that we can start to see some trends emerge as to where organizations have issues with their customer data maturity. So first off, strategy. Remember, in strategy, the first thing we asked about was the level of importance given to customer data within the organization. Responses ranged at the low maturity level from displaying the capabilities siloed within a particular department with no dedicated budget to higher maturity responses where organizations had strong levels of executive buy-in with high levels of dedicated budget. The second aspect to this score was how the customer data practice is applied. So responses here ranged from siloed campaigning in the marketing department to insights informing all customer touchpoints with continuous optimization. And I will say for that second aspect, respondents did demonstrate big room for improvement with that particular question, with only 8% demonstrating the highest level of maturity specific to applying their strategy. That was the second lowest of any individual aspect. Strategy was one of the 2 areas with the highest level of laggards. And also outside of that, the split here is fairly even across the other categories. Moving on to the second dimension of maturity, organizational structure. This was another area where firms demonstrated some struggles. So here we asked about the first aspect being the skills present on customer data teams. So answers there ranged from simple siloed channel owners, so the email manager or maybe a display ad manager at the low maturity end, to high maturity firms that had multidisciplinary teams, including analysts, data scientists, and more, with representatives from every part of the business. So that's the first aspect. The The second aspect was how the team is organized. So whether the team exists within a department or whether that team is cross-functional with liaisons to every part of the organization. When we ran these scores, 17% of the companies fell into the laggard bucket wasn't particularly high. The combined 63% that fell into the lower two groups was the second highest of any category. 9% was also the lowest of any full dimension for the share of pioneers. So this looks like an area where firms commonly report some opportunities for improvement, and is an area where we might want to focus some of our recommendations, for as far as improving your own customer data strategies. The third dimension of maturity are data practices or data management capabilities. For this dimension, remember we had three aspects. The first aspect was about the breadth and depth of data sources. So at the low maturity end was only using transactional data, like maybe sales data or conversion data. And at the high maturity end was more using even emerging data types like IoT and using that data in real time. The second aspect was about data preparation, with the low maturity responses having little to no data preparation, to higher maturity responses where there were dedicated preparation-only resources who are doing all of that data wrangling, including automating and standardizing that data. The third aspect was about data management practices, with low maturity being around data not being centralized, and then higher maturity responses where there was a centralized customer data platform that's well governed and has documented processes. So here we found a much greater percentage of companies falling into the pioneer level, and we also see a fairly high percentage of laggards. So the capabilities really split to each side of the spectrum here. So there was a greater diversity of scores in this particular area. Moving on to the fourth dimension of maturity, analytics and measurement. Remember, there were two aspects here. Number one was about the methodology for generating insights. Responses at the low maturity end were simple campaign analysis or basic segmentation. And then at the high maturity end was full closed loop reporting in real time with continuous optimization. The second aspect was around the sophistication of the statistics. On the low maturity end was simple univariate or bivariate statistics like A/B testing. At the high end was artificial intelligence methodology, deep learning, and reinforcement learning. As you can see here, very few firms reached the pioneer level. We had a very low score of 10%. The laggard level was also particularly high, demonstrating that this category has a lot of room for improvement. It's also an area where we see a lot of emerging technology and vendors in the marketplace. You kind of see a lot of vendors around data visualization, data science, and analysis these days. Moving on to the fifth dimension of maturity, process. Here there were four aspects to this score. So how insight generation flows through the organization is the first aspect, at the low maturity end being ad hoc with reporting. At the high maturity end, a cross-functional team with inputs from technology, analytics, and business unit teams. The second aspect was how generated insights flow throughout the organization. At the low maturity end, there was irregular reporting delivered manually, compared to high maturity firms who have well-documented reports, sharing automated insights proactively. The third aspect was about how insights are prioritized. At the low maturity end, ad hoc or first come, first serve prioritization, with the high maturity end having prioritization based on methodical ROI processes. The fourth aspect was around how insights are tied to actions. So whether the insights are kind of manually implemented into action based on reporting directly within siloed tools, or whether there's kind of a centralized data platform where insights are built in and then automated to happen in real time as the customer journey happens. Here we saw the highest percentage of pioneer firms and the lowest percentage of laggards. So the combined 52% in the highest levels was the highest of any dimension, showing that organizations believe that their processes are fairly strong with less room for improvement. So this might be an area to focus less time. Moving on to the sixth dimension of maturity, technology. We had two aspects for this one. First off, how technology is integrated. with responses ranging from ad hoc point-to-point integrations manually implemented by the IT team, all the way up to high maturity firms who report a central integration platform with an extensive set of customer data and analytical output that provides streamlined access. The second aspect we delved into was how data is activated. So at the low end of maturity, there was manual or batch processes in place. And then at the higher end was where data was being activated across many departments, including marketing, customer service, sales, operations, maybe even product development. And those insights were being activated in a coordinated manner or automated with those insights built directly into the data. I will highlight that this particular aspect, this second aspect of technology, was another individual aspect where firms reported major struggles. So this was the number one, was the question that had the least number, with respondents indicating the highest level of maturity, with only 6% of respondents indicating the highest level. This was another dimension where we saw very few firms at the pioneer level. Again, that 10% is fairly low, combined with a very high level of laggards. So that 20% laggard level was at the highest. That demonstrates that this is another area where we'll really want to focus when we get down to the recommendations for increasing your maturity. And like we mentioned, the two areas where firms were most likely to struggle was applying strategy and activating insights in technology. So very similar points if we think about those individually. Moving on to the next insight from the report was that customer data strategy drives results. So earlier on, we showed the 16 business metrics and the percentage of respondents who reported their customer data strategy well supporting that particular dimension. There wasn't much debate here around the fact that customer data strategy is well supporting key business goals. So out of the 16 business goals, 15 had greater than 80% well supporting that particular goal. These percentages show how highly respondents reported their goals being supported, with only answers that specifically reported well supported being included here. If there was only somewhat supported response here, that was not included in these answers. So highlighting a few goals that were particularly well supported, we see that 92% felt their goals to increase products and services per customer were well supported by their customer data strategy. 90% felt that improved customer satisfaction was well supported, and 88% felt that increased customer value was well supported. Moving on to the second set of key business goals here, 89% felt that customer data strategy well supported improved customer trust. 86% reported well supporting improved Net Promoter Score, and 85% reported improved privacy safeguards from their customer data strategy. So this shows that results go well beyond just improved business performance and operational efficiency to goals around customer privacy, trust, and even regulatory compliance. And moving on to our final dimension, or our final top-level insight here, was that maturity makes results even better. We can see here how respondents reported that their customer data integration initiatives supported key business goals. So we're no longer talking about their customer data strategy. We're specifically talking about the results of their customer data integration initiative. Here we broke the results of integration initiatives down by the company's maturity level. So we compared laggards to pioneers for each one of these benefits. So earlier we already highlighted some of the improved results that we saw around customer insight, operational efficiency, and business performance, with a 35 percentage point lift reporting a better understanding of customers, 37 percentage point lift reporting increased team productivity, and a 43 percentage point lift reporting better lift from customer propensity models. Looking at a few of the other results here, we see some additional improvement in those three areas, but we also see some improvements around employee job satisfaction as well. So there we see a 27 percentage point lift for increased business analyst and data scientist job satisfaction, which is actually a pretty key goal for most organizations, as that role tends to be in very high demand with a lot of opportunities. We also see a 31 percentage point improvement in more efficient use of marketing budget and a 28 percentage point lift in identifying new customers. So the improvement in results across many different business goals is pretty impressive for higher maturity firms when you compare to low maturity firms. Another interesting finding that we had here was that older strategies aren't necessarily better. You might think on the surface that having a customer data strategy in place for over 2 years would lead to higher maturity and better results, but we actually found the opposite. So among laggards, only 17% had customer data strategies that have been in place for 2 years or less. So laggards tended to have very old strategies. That compared to 40% of pioneers. And then when we look at the percent that are over 2 years, 69% of laggard companies had strategies that were over 2 years old. So dated customer data strategies don't adequately serve the increasingly empowered customers' demand for personalized experiences in real time. More mature firms tend to have newer customer data strategies, and this trend holds out for customer data integration programs as well. This demonstrates the importance of an evolving customer data strategy. It's not a set it and forget it type of strategy. All right, so that's the data. What does that mean that you should do with your customer data program? So let's delve into the final results here. Key recommendation number 1. Assess your current capabilities honestly. So it's critical to understand the importance of integrating insights. I moved on to the next one. It's important that you're honest about your organization's capabilities. So whether you're plotting the course of your customer data strategy or performing a checkup on a strategy that you've been operationalizing, understanding where your company ranks against best practices helps you figure out which areas to improve in. Like we said, there are 6 dimensions. Some of those dimensions you might be very strong in. Some of those ones you might be weak in. It's important to assess which ones you should focus on. Second recommendation, understand the importance of integrating insights directly with action. So there is significant power in automating this process, but it takes a lot of work to build insights directly into your data foundation. This study found that firms who applied a specific focus on customer data integration enjoy a host of benefits, which are only amplified as firms' overall customer data practice matures. Ensure that your customer data integration is included as a key part of your overall customer data strategy roadmap. So that integration piece is key. Moving on to the third recommendation is that this landscape is constantly changing. So customer data continues to increase in volume, variety, and velocity, and you need technology that matches this diverse landscape. It's in a constant state of flux and expansion, and firms must keep up to launch, then refine customer analytics strategy. Many firms, especially laggards, may not have the initial resources on hand, and in this case, it would be best to consider technology partners that will help smooth the challenges, both merging legacy data and incorporating emerging data types, like from IoT and new customer engagement channels. Key recommendation number 4. This is not a set it and forget it task. It takes constant iteration and reevaluation as customer behavior and technology changes. So strategies over 2 years old were shown to have much worse results. It's a big lift to establish your company's customer data strategy, so you should maximize that investment and the value of this work by building in continuous optimization as the final step of your roadmap. And finally, the key recommendation number 5, organizationally, a center of excellence approach makes a lot of sense. Customer insights professionals must walk a fine line between providing insights that give a cross-company view of customers and providing high-value insights that will drive specific value for a line of business, operations, and functional roles in organizations of all sizes. So many leading firms are using this center of excellence approach, where the center of excellence owns and facilitates a group with input from all lines of business to understand needs and priorities, arbitrate the conflicts between those priorities as they arise, and then provide input into future directions and initiatives that the center of excellence will pursue. Then they have liaisons to the rest of the business so that these insights can be distributed. So a center of excellence approach was found to be very powerful here. And that is the end of our overview webinar. Those were the high-level results. We will have more webinars diving into individual questions that we had during the survey, little nuggets that might be specific to a particular industry or a particular geography. So keep your eye out for those future webinars. In the meantime, assess your own company's data maturity with a data maturity assessment tool that we have available at Tealium.com/data maturity test. You can also download the full report that we just went over the findings from, also on the Tealium website at Tealium.com/resource/whitepaper/Forrester-customer-data-maturity. And with that, we'll wrap up. Thanks, Jake.
Thanks, Matt. Super insightful overview on kind of the progress of global companies towards customer data maturity and leveraging that customer data. So thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.